What was the scariest we need to leave, now, that feeling that you've ever experienced, serious? I was in Taco Bell with my daughter and I saw a guy come in and back out with a t-shirt over his hand. I told her to dump her tray and get moving. We went out to the car quickly and left. Found out later on the news that the guy robbed the place with the gun hiding under his t-shirt. When I was a kid, an adult patted my head and I developed an instant inexplicable loathing for him and refused to be alone with him. My parents told me I was being ridiculous and forced me to be around him. He was later sent to prison for abuse of a girl. Wednesday midday run along a beautiful river pathway near my apartment block. About 1 kilometer in, I felt people watching me and directly turned around and ran home, even though I did not see anybody. Closed the 2 magnetic gates leading up to my door and didn't see anybody around or follow me. About 10 minutes later, 2 guys were at my front door, trying to push it in. I was luckily on the other side of the door at that moment and pushed it back, closed with all my force and began screaming. I managed to security lock the front door and text my apartment block for help. I was on the 2nd floor, and they obviously watched which apartment I went into. Looking back at the apartment's security cameras, they were able to see the 2 guys pull apart the magnetic security gates, 2 of them. The block then quickly changed the gates to a mechanic lock that cannot be pulled apart. Standing outside my friend's house watering their garden while they were away on vacation. Not even 30 seconds after I shut the door and locked it, about 6 men started pounding on the door, reaching in the mail slot trying to unlock said door, telling me to come out plus calling me cutie and other degrading pet names. I was walking down the street in a very unfamiliar city with a group of friends. I got this feeling and didn't know how to articulate it, so I said to the group, "Hey, I've got to use the restroom, can we just duck inside the subway real quick? I promise I'll be quick." About a minute later, there was a shootout just up the block. If we wouldn't have gone into the restaurant, we would have all been standing right in the middle of the incident waiting to cross the street. I was scuba diving in Asia. 3 of us went to a reef that hadn't been dived on before, which bottomed out at 50-70 m depth. 5 minutes into the dive, we all get a very bad feeling like we were being watched. Ignored it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Further 10 minutes into the dive, we all watched the silhouette of a white shark glide slowly past, right on the periphery of where we could see. Then glide back in the other direction a minute later. The decompression stop to get out was the scariest 3 minutes of my life. When I was a teenager, me and some friends were hanging out around midnight. A caravan drives past slowly with a few people looking out the windows. We all look at each other quiet, and the caravan pulls into a nearby parking space. We all get up and walk to our bikes, because something feels really off. A few minutes later, we hear someone shout, and as I turned around there was about 5 or 6 people getting out with metal pipes and other things in hands. We ran so fast, nothing happened, but I'm 99% sure we were about to get beaten and robbed. Grew up along the Gulf Coast. Daily storms in the summer were normal. We were heading home when one came in really quick. All of us were elementary or junior high age. We were crossing 2 wide open football fields. All of our hair was standing straight up in the air. We knew that meant lightning was imminent. A car was driving past, jumped the curb and drove up to us. We all got into the car and she slowly rolled back to the street. We went another block. And the lightning struck the goalpost. It was so close. Was never afraid of lightning until then. That was around 1979. I'm 57 and don't mess around. In college, I was studying at my school's business school building, waiting to meet a friend, and I had a sudden sense of dread. I texted my friend that I would just meet her at her dorm later instead of meeting at the business school, and I left to walk to a nearby library instead. When I got to the library about 20 minutes later, I checked my phone and I had nearly 20 missed calls and texts from my friends who knew I was at the business building. Literally seconds after I left, a student entered the building and stabbed multiple people, killing one professor and injuring several students. It happened in the room I had just been in. I had a 9-month-old baby at home and didn't go out much, and one of my friends was in from out of town and asked if I wanted to see a band, whose members were people I knew socially from college. I said sure, that will be fun. I met her and a bunch of people at a bar across the street before the show and had a nice time, but got a feeling that I should go home. My husband was at home with our baby and wanted me to have fun, and I was, but I had a bad feeling to just leave. I said my goodbyes and left. There was a shooting at the bar that night. No one I knew was hurt, but they were locked in the bar for hours and it was terrifying for them. I'm glad I trusted my instincts. When I was a kid, the neighbor across the street offered me a ride to school when he saw me walking and said he'd give me candy too. It felt off, so I just said no thanks and kept walking, thinking nothing of it. Maybe a year later, he shot and killed his wife and then himself. A shady-looking guy told me to come here when I was waiting for my mom under the apartment building. I was about 10. I ran upstairs immediately without looking back. Looking back as a 25-year-old, I couldn't imagine why any normal adult would need to speak to a random 10-year-old unless the kid looks lost or is doing something dangerous. Glad I bolted. I exited a metro station about 2 decades ago, and the parking lot had a small area behind bushes where I parked. As I headed into the parking lot, I saw 2 guys standing between a row of cars, which looked out of place. They were watching me to see where I was going. I decided to walk right toward them, and they moved off some, then I walked to my car, and drove away. I glanced back, to see them heading back for the bushy spot. They killed a woman shortly thereafter who was parked in that bushy area. When I was walking home age 7 and a man asked me to help him find his puppy, I felt pure fear and adrenaline and said, I can't, I have to get home, sorry. I've never sprinted so fast in my life. I missed the Westminster Bridge attack by minutes. I was supposed to go meet my husband after a scan at St. Thomas's, so I would have had to cross the bridge to get the tube around to meet him. I was heavily pregnant, slow, and something didn't feel right, so I decided instead to walk to Waterloo East and go home. I was walking towards the station when it happened.